Okay, welcome to Firefighting Today, the weekly roundtable where we talk about all sorts of things fire service related. We meet each Sunday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and we have a panel discussion. We've got a great panel tonight, a full panel, a wide variety of department sizes and experiences. We're going to talk a little bit about officer selection. We visited this topic once in the past, but we're going to kind of take a different look at it. My headline to this was officer selection. Are we doing it right? And obviously that's kind of subjective based, but we'll see if we're doing it right or not. We'll hear what the panel has to say. If you're watching us live on YouTube, you can certainly leave a YouTube comment, or you can comment directly on the events page. We'll bring that comment right into the discussion, and the panel will speak about it and get it going. So let's start, as we always do, with a panel introduction, and we'll take it from there. So I am Pete Lamb. I'm the author of PeteLamb.com, and I am the host of the Firefighter Training Podcast. Retired fire chief with a couple of years experience, so that's where I'm coming from, and that's my perspective on this tonight. Warren, tell the folks who you are, say hello, and a little of your background.
Good evening. Good evening, folks. Warren Whitley, retired assistant chief from the Prince William County, Virginia Department of Fire and Rescue. It's a large combination system just outside of D.C. Now enjoying a quiet life on the coast of North Carolina.
I love it. I love it. Thanks for being here, Warren. I appreciate you being here. Rob Fling, say hello.
Good evening, everybody. Rob Fling, currently First Assistant Chief with the Dix Hills Fire Department on Long Island, and I'm also the founder of Face Peace On.
All right, great to have you here, Rob. I see you doing a little brainstorming in the background there. There's a lot of sticky notes up on the board there.
That's my kids brainstorming.
I love it.
I think the cure for the common cold is back there somewhere.
Yeah, we'll work on that if we come up.
There's nothing spelled right. I have to have a talk with them later.
All right, I love it. Joe Starnes, Joe's looking good tonight. What are we doing, Joe? Say hello.
Well, we have survived another week, and at my age, that's a good thing. I am Joe Starnes. I am with the folks at Oak Grove Volunteer Fire Department in Kings Mountain, North Carolina. I'm one of the co-managers of Project Kill the Flashover, and stay tuned for next year, Project Kill the Fear. So, got plenty to do, Chief. Thank you for having me.
Great. We always appreciate your input, Joe. Coming to us from the north, Greg, say hello. Tell the folks about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Greg Howard. I'm a fairly recent deputy fire chief for a small combination department, and we're out on Vancouver Island, Canada.
Great. Thanks for you being here with us. I know the time change is a problem, so I appreciate that, the time difference between East and West. Frank, say hello.
Hi, Frank Blackley with the Wilmington, North Carolina Fire Department. I'm currently the Assistant Chief of Administrative / Support Services, which is everything but Ops. Been there about 2 years and did Ops for about 3 years before that.
Excellent, excellent. John Haywick, say hello. John's on duty tonight, so he may have to spring into action. John, say hello to the folks.
Good evening. How's everybody doing? John Haywick, I'm lieutenant for the City of Passaic Fire Department in New Jersey. I've been here about 14 years, so just looking to contribute tonight, and thank you for having me on again.
Oh, we always appreciate your input, John. Ethan, say hello.
Hi, Pete. Ethan Bansick, Lorraine, Ohio, student of the trade, and passidonfiretraining.wordpress.com.
All right, we'll talk just a bit about that a little later on. That's a brand new site Ethan's working on, so we want to get some folks aimed in that direction. And Adam, certainly not least, but last. So,
good evening, everyone. Adam Ganaway coming from Kellogg, Iowa, captain with the Kellogg Volunteer Fire Department.
All right, great stuff. All right, we just picked up a handful of viewers already, so let me just say this one more time. If you are watching us live on YouTube, if you leave a comment, you can interact with the panel, and we will bring that comment right back into us and we will discuss it. So feel free to join in the conversation. All right, so here we are. We're talking about officer selection, and we have got a wide variety. You've heard who the panel is. We've got a wide variety of how that happens, and let's kind of talk about, see if we can make something happen here. How could we make our current system better? So I've been involved in a couple of things. In the small volunteer department, there were really no rules or regulations. It was kind of an election is how you got appointed. I've been involved in departments. My career department here that I just left was a civil service. That is a statewide situation. I'll have John talk about that a little bit more. And my actual selection as chief was a 2-day assessment center. So we'll talk a little bit about assessment centers as we go, but that was a 2-day process to get the fire and interviews, et cetera, et cetera. But that process was a 2-day process. So let's start at, Adam, let's start with you. You're probably the easiest situation. How do you select officers in your small department, and is there a term that they're good for? How does that work?
In our small department, the only elected positions are the chief and the secretary of treasury. And then once the chief is selected, he will select his officers, and if he ever gets voted out the following year, the new chief can select his officers. So it's chief selection.
All right, chief selection or an appointment. Now, once they're selected, how long are they in that position?
They're until if we get a new chief in there and he decides to re-staff his officers, he's able to do that.
Okay,
So
good.
We have no term.
All right, so that's kind of interesting. I want to talk about that. Is that a good idea, bad idea? That idea certainly has some merit. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Ethan, what goes on in your home city?
Pete, we have a city testing process that they go through here.
Okay. All right, so the city actually conducts the test. It's not a statewide situation. Are there parts to that test, Ethan? Is it just a written, or do you know?
I believe it's part written and then part is half-day assessment center.
Okay, an assessment center. John, what's going on in the city of Passaic or in New Jersey, for that matter?
For the career departments, we have a promotional process through the civil service. There are some towns that are chief's tests, but most of the career departments have a civil service testing. So what we do is a application to take the written test for your first and second level supervisor. So you're doing a written, and then you're going to be doing a verbal. So the written test is 1 day, probably about 75 to 100 questions. They'll take that back, they'll score it, pass, fail, and then with a grade, and then they'll invite you back for oral scenarios down at the testing center in Trenton.
All right. Now, is there a minimum? Do I have to score a certain number to be able to move forward?
I believe so. I think there's a bottom line of if you do fail it, but to move on. And then they have the seniority factored in as well for each level that you have.
All right.
So
good.
it's a state math thing. You can't really do A plus B equals C. It's like A plus E equals X.
Right, exactly. Frank, what do you do in the city? Is there any statewide involvement, county? Is it a civil service situation? How does it work there in Wilmington?
No, we run our promotional process in-house, whether it's for master firefighter, captain, company officer, or battalion chief.
And briefly, what are the components, Frank? How does that look? What's the process look like?
It's a multi-step process. One of the first things they have to do is turn in what we call a PAR. In other words, it's a personnel accountability report. In other words, what they're doing is they're basically talking about themselves. What have they done since they have joined the fire department? What have they done to improve it? Also, what are they doing on the outside? Are they in a service club? Are they off in their church? Whatever it may be. Coaching baseball. It doesn't really matter, but it really kind of lets them promote what they're doing. It talks about what kind of maybe internal committees they served on, what they did with that. So it's really a kind of an in-depth process, and then there's a HR issue problem they deal with, and of course there's a tactical problem, and then I think there's also an interview.
All right, you mentioned a multi-step process, Frank. What is the time? How long from start to finish? Is it 3 months, 6 months? What does it take?
Probably no more than 3 months.
Okay, no more than.
The promotional process is posted, and I think it's open for anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks. They have to get all their information in, and then then the process kind of starts after that.
Okay, good. Greg, what goes on in your part of the world, in your own department, and in your part of the world in general? How does it work? You have a combination department. Can volunteers hold ranks as well as the career folks? How does that work?
Well, the only two career folks are the chief and myself.
Okay.
So everybody else below us is paid on call. And as far as we run in British Columbia, we run under the Office of the Fire Commissioner. So they've recently put out a bunch of standards that's been a complete refresh. So everybody now is scraping to put that into our programs. But traditionally with my department, we used to elect people into officer positions, and that's been not the case for about 5 years. So we have a list of prerequisites for people moving from firefighter into company officer. And the chief officer positions don't come up often. When they do, there's another list of prereqs. And typically what happens is someone holds an acting position for about a year, in which time they're able to complete the Fire Officer 1, Fire Officer 2, and so on.
Okay, good. Joe, what goes on in Oak Grove? And then we'll come back to you, Joe, and talk a little private industry stuff, but what goes on in Oak Grove?
Well, in Oak Grove, they similar to this all-volunteer system, no nomination. The fire chief, assistant chief of ops, and the training assistant chief are all elected positions. The chief itself will hold, every 3 years, will hold a nomination of potential officers. You can nominate yourself or someone else can nominate you. They go under a review under the fire chief and 2 assistant chiefs. There is a prerequisite of skills that kind of check off a list of skills, and then the interview process after that with the fire chief is his discretion at that point.
Okay, so we've got a couple of departments where the fire chief has a fair amount of authority here in the process, certainly. Rob, what goes on in your world?
It's an election process. Getting ready to come up on it now. As a matter of fact, we just had nominations the other night. You submit your qualifications to the election committee, who reviews those qualifications and makes sure they're all correct. And then roughly 1 month later, we hold the election.
And does the position have a term, Rob? In other words, does that expire?
It's roughly, we do elections every year, but typically it's a 2-year term, although you are elected every year. You'll hold the same position for 2 years.
Okay. All right. So there's a little continuity with that. Warren, you're looking at both sides of the department. Talk about either side of the department, if you would, for me.
All right. Well, the career side is assessment centers mostly until you get up to battalion chief and assistant chief. Then it's mostly resume and interviews with the chief. In the case of battalion chiefs, they may run an assessment center. It depends. And they've gone back and forth between having a contractor run the assessment centers and running them internally. Volunteer side depends on the company. Some elect all the officers, some elect the chief, and he appoints his officers. The entire system, though, is under what's known as the uniform rank structure policy. So they set the minimum prerequisites for each of the officer levels for what they're supposed to hold. It's not totally implemented yet. There's still grandfathered chief officers in the system. So eventually it will be that every officer on both sides will have to meet the same minimum prerequisites for training.
Okay, good. We do have a question, and I'll just kind of open it to the panel. Christine is with us. Thanks for being with us, Christine. I appreciate it. So the question she's asking is, should departments have a minimum number of years that the member should be active before being considered for promotion or election? and what should you consider as far as education and experience. So that's anybody want to chime in on that? I'll leave that up there a little bit. In many departments here in the Northeast, you must be in grade for, and there is a variety, 3 years. Some are 5 years, some are 7 years. You must be in the rank previous to that a certain number of years. So that's fairly common here in the Northeast, Christine, and that's usually governed in many cases by the collective bargaining agreement or the labor agreement on the career side of the house. I don't know of a lot of volunteer departments that do that as a minimum, but if somebody would, I think John Haywick, you were going to answer something there, and I may have jumped you. So John, did you want to weigh in on that, and then I'll go to Rob.
Yes, for the civil service, your first 3 years you have to sit in as a firefighter. Then you're eligible to take your first level supervisor test. Once you get promoted, you have to wait a year in grade before testing for your next level up. Whether it's going to be from lieutenant to captain or from starting out as captain to battalion chief. There's different departments throughout the state, and they run the different rank structures. My city runs all of them. We run from lieutenant, captain to battalion chief, who's in charge of the tour, to deputy chiefs, which are the administrative chiefs, and then we have a chief of department.
Okay, good. So there is a system in place. Rob, what were you going to add to this?
We have to hold the office of chief of department. You have to be a member in good standing for at least 5 years, with at least one additional year as an assistant chief. Same runs for captain. You have to be a member for 5 years with at least 24 months consecutive as a lieutenant.
Okay, good. So that should answer Christine's question. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you being here and being part of that. So, Warren, let's just go back. You were the one who mentioned the outside contractor coming in to give the exam. So I want to go, let's just jump on the career side for a minute. So I'm going to go to Warren, Frank, and John on whether or not you bring in an outside contractor. What was the experience with that, Warren? You said that kind of varies back and forth. What is the current school of thought on that?
Well, it wasn't so much a school of thought as it was budget restrictions. I think the chief, who's still there, really liked having the outside vendor come in, only to make the, I guess, to make it seem like it was more objective. The contractor would be given certain requirements that he was looking for to test for, or sometimes specific, sometimes general. He'd always want a tactical issue involving, in his case, he wanted EMS and fire treated equally. The normal run-of-the-mill personnel issue, things like that, and generally also writing assignments to see how well they wrote reports or even correspondence.
Right, okay.
And then when the bubble burst with the real estate and revenue was down, then they went back to doing some internal assessment centers, but they were still based on the models of what the contractor had been using for consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so folks know, even in a small department in my small community, you start doing outside contractor assessments, $10, $12, $15, $20,000 is not unheard of in some of these things, depending upon the complexity. So the dollars are a real number without question. Frank, are you doing this internally or externally? Is there a contractor involved?
We're doing everything internally, just mainly because of, I guess, our size to a certain extent, but we feel like we've got a pretty good system that we've been able to work through, and I guess part of it deals with the change in leadership and their expectations on what we expect of whether it's a master firefighter, a company officer, battalion chief, and even assistant chief. So all of that just kind of plays into it, but we really had, the only time they've ever used any outside was when they hired the fire chief, and that was it.
Right, right. For the fire chief, they typically go outside. You're right. You're right. John Haywick, what's going on? Do you use an outside contractor? Does the civil service, I'm guessing maybe the state or the county run the exam? Is that true? John may have jumped out, or he is still muted. Let's just give him the. There you are.
Okay, here I am. The state actually uses contractors that come in and develop testing. Our firefighters actually had to go down to Trenton several times this past late summer into early fall to take the series of tests to see how they can create a test for the new entrance level test. So they do assessments, but they bring in outside agencies.
Okay. Okay, good enough. Let's go over to Lane. Lane, good to have you with us. Lane is Lane is a battalion chief out in San Diego, so he's coming at it from a pretty good sized department as well. For Captain Written, if it's passed, it's followed by an assessment center with a command sim, personnel role playing, writing sample, and oral interview. Similar for a BC, but they just ramp it up a notch. So thank you for that, Lane. And you might just comment, Lane, if on your next go around, if does that work? I mean, does that system seem to work? I'd be curious to know that. So a couple of things have come up, and Warren, you said it, and kind of Frank maybe just kind of flirted with it. But one of the reasons we go with the contractor, right, is this whole issue of the fix is in. Right? We can't trust anybody because the fix is in. The fire chief is going to pick who he wants or she wants or whatever the situation is. So we make these decisions on the selection of our officer based on, I don't know, some level of mistrust. I'm going to refer to Joe for a minute. So Joe, you've got a ton of experience working with a large corporation. So you're working with AT&T. Did AT&T ever decide that they were going to go over and get 3 executives from IBM to come in and test your personnel and pick who was going to be the middle management for AT&T? Did they ever decide that was a good idea?
No, that wasn't the way that was managed at all. Of course, AT&T, to use that example where I came from, very large human resources organization with a lot of dynamic consulting and university backgrounds. Of course, the executives are under contract or hired, completely different than the operational folks up to contract level, and so you go all the way to director level before you start getting that kind of oversight. The actual other process is governed and has evolved from the labor side of the world, and it's bid and resume and qualifications and literally a hiring process at each level. So then you compete against those. The manager has the ability to close the ad if he or she doesn't find the talent they want. So there's a way, even with some oversight, it can be not manipulated, but it certainly can be managed. The other thing is that every promotion is managed 2 levels above the promotional level. So the immediate manager doesn't manage the promotion. The promotion is managed 2 levels above the person that's trying to get promoted.
All right, that's an interesting concept. I mean, I was being bizarre that you would borrow somebody, but I guess my point is, and I have actually given assessments. I have given assessment centers. Is the system working? Do you get the candidate that you're supposed to get all of the time? I guess that's my question to the group. I think that sometimes our system, I sat on an assessment panel and we got involved in it, and independent grading, all the evaluators grading independently, we all did the right thing, and when we got to the end, it was not, in my opinion, the right candidate in one situation. The process went through, we did what we were supposed to do, but I'm not convinced that the system worked the way it should have in terms of process. So, Warren, you may have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in lots of assessment centers on both sides, especially helping out other departments in the COG region in D.C. because we share resources as far as sending evaluators and whatnot. I think a lot of times assessment centers can, people kind of know once they've been to one what to expect, and they can start tuning their skills to get through that assessment center with a higher grade than probably their ability is to actually execute the job. So what I've seen, my observations are is we have failed miserably, at least in the departments I've seen, of preparing people to become an officer. So we're not training them ahead of time. What we're counting on is the assessment center to identify people with potential, and then relying on OJT, hopefully before their probation is up, to get the job done. So we're kind of behind the curve. We're not doing the work we should be doing ahead of time. We're doing it after the fact. After the fact, in many cases, they fail, or the system fails by not putting them back at their ability level during their probation period.
Yeah, you said it much better than I could say it, but I'm not far off, Warren. I think that, and there are people, I say this with half a tongue in cheek. I have folks call me to help them prepare for assessment centers, and I try to tell them, don't game the system, for lack of a better term, right? There's a way to take the test, which makes you a more attractive candidate, but you might, in fact, be setting yourself up to fail when you hit the street. The test is not the test. The test is when the bell hits. That's when the test is. And I couldn't agree more that I think that in some cases we are testing a skill set, but we may not be getting the true snapshot. I'm going to go over to Frank, and then I'll make a comment about the. I have a civil service one, and I'd like either Warren or John to jump in on. Frank, did you have a comment on the? Are we getting the right candidate? Does the test measure what we're trying to measure?
I would like to think so. I don't think necessarily a written test is always should be the final say-so, because you've got a lot more things to think about, such as what's their personality like? Can they be a good company officer? Are they going to become the problem child with that? So, but usually, hopefully, like I said, with our process, it's a little bit better than it used to be, because they're ranked according to their scores, but there's multiple scores. But plus, they also have to make a minimum score in each component to even move forward. Because if you can't pass one of them, that to me is a red flag that you've got to worry about with that. So that's been a recent change because of an issue we had that came up that we didn't think about. So I think that's important too. But it also goes back to what they were talking about is preparing them for that. And usually with most of our processes, there's a informational session where they can come in and they hear about how the process is going to go. And to me, it's amazing how many don't show up that are in the process.
Right. From a civil service perspective, I see folks studying for civil service exams all the time, and they're studying the last questions that were asked on a previous exam. They're highlighting, chapters and paragraphs out of a textbook because those might be questions. The point of study materials years ago was if I could get you to read the book, you might absorb some knowledge which would prepare you for the task. And now what we're doing is we're kind of memorizing questions in chapter and verse to be able to get by at least the written portion. John, is that what you experience a little bit in New Jersey? Is it at least on the written side we're talking about specifically? And then we've got some comments from the audience as well. So, John Haywick.
I do agree with you. Right now, our firefighters are studying for their lieutenant's test or the first level supervisor for this next round of testing, which is coming up on the 15th. So they're given they're told they have to read 7 different textbooks, ranging from Dunn, Norman, Brannigan, all different books, and they can pull anything from any of these books. Also, New Jersey has an addendum which handles pass alerts, PARs, maydays, all that stuff that we have in our laws that they're responsible to know as well. So we hope that some of the knowledge gets in there, gets in our heads when we're reading it, and it stays. But it's a lot of knowledge to absorb for the testing process. But I wish it was for the greater good.
Right, right. Listen, I don't want to be doom and gloom. I mean, I think we're doing the right thing. I think assessments is the right way to go. I'm just not convinced as we sit here. We're recording here tonight in November of 2014. I don't think we're there yet. I don't think we perfected the system. We got a few comments from the audience, so let's talk about those. John Dixon's with us. Thank you, John. I appreciate it. In my opinion, what we're experiencing in the last decade is the professionalization of our profession. John just writes this stuff because he wants to see if I can pronounce it correctly when I read it, so for the audio portion. I believe the more focus on developing effective officers is the combination of fireground tactics with equal time for fire. There must be something else here. There must be another piece. John, I don't disagree. I think we are becoming more professional. I think we're headed down the right path, but I still think we're coming up a little short in some areas, and there are a number of reasons for that. So let's do a couple of these, and I would ask the panel if there's something you want to comment on as we go through this here. We've got 2 or 3 comments right out in front of us here, so let's do that. So we've got Lane again. The quality of our officer corps is as good as it's ever been, especially important given we've had a lot of retirements and promoting junior people than in years past. And we see a lot of departments that are in this thing where we talk about we're losing experience, right? We are losing experienced people. And I would think, I don't know, I'll ask our folks in the volunteer service, are you losing your experienced people, or are they hanging around? While Lane's comment is up there, Rob, are you hanging on to your experienced people, or what?
Yeah, we are. We actually have a pretty good membership right now. We're getting a lot of new people in, and all of our senior guys are sticking in there.
Okay, good. Greg, what are you finding? Are you losing experience, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. My most senior lieutenant and captain at Station 1, both looking at career positions, and they're on a number of hire lists. So both those guys have at least 10 years in. The people coming up behind them, 3-4 years tops.
Okay. And Adam, out in your world, do you have senior people that you're retaining? I know you're working with the juniors trying to develop a whole new breed, but are you retaining your senior people, at least on the volunteer side?
We've got 3 on a department that we consider our senior members. All the rest are getting younger.
Okay. Okay. Good. Let's go to one more here. Let's take lanes off. Let's go over to Johnny. Johnny, again, always great to see you in the audience. I appreciate your support and your input. What does the panel feel is a good amount of time before a firefighter should consider promotion? Johnny doesn't feel that 3 years should be as required here in Jersey is right, yet possible for a firefighter with limited experience to be, and let's see if that continues. Okay. So the question Johnny's asking, and anybody, I would pass that along to anybody. I have my own little caveat on this one, but what does the panel feel is a good amount of time before a firefighter should consider promotion? Anybody want to tackle that?
Yeah, I'll put 2 cents in on that, Pete. And I guess, what is 3 years? I mean, 3 years in a busy career department is hundreds of runs. 3 years in a quiet volunteer hall, could be 10 structure fires, or so the time on it by itself, I don't think is a good measure.
Right, I agree with you. I don't think time is the only measure, and it certainly is relative to the system you come out of, the system that you're working with. I think that's right. Um, is there? Well, let's go to Johnny's second comment because I think there's a message there. Let's go over to the second comment, which is, and I think this is a home run, quite frankly. Many of his mentors always stress the importance of preparing for the position, not just the test. I think that's I think that's a home run right there. There's no question that you should be preparing for the job, not just to pass the test. Now, while we're on that path, let's just talk about that a little bit because I think that deserves some merit, and I would ask anybody who would like to weigh in on this. If a member passes the lieutenant's exam, let's talk about the lowest level officer, and I don't know, Warren, if you have sergeants or if there is another rank in place. So let's call it the first line supervisor, if you will. What training is given to the first line supervisor after he is selected, appointed, or anointed, whatever he happens to be, however you get him in this position? What training is required, Warren, both on the career side and the volunteer side? Is there an officer school? How does that work?
On the career side, they've kind of, fortunately, have started trying to prepare them before the promotion. They have what they call the lap series, lap 1, 2, 3, and 4, corresponding with the level of promotion. So lap 1 gets the firefighter ready to become the driver or master firefighter, whatever you want to call them, who can ride the seat when the officer's off. And I think that process is a little over a year long, all told. Get through that, they can sit for the promotion, and then when they become that next level, then they can take lap 2 to prepare to become a lieutenant and so on. So on the career side, I think they're making the effort to train before the promotion. Volunteer side is mostly like we were. This is a general statement in the county because some are more proactive than others. I think it's still the OJT once you get into the position, because they may not know who's going to be selected for that position until the elections turn up, other than those minimum conditions under uniform rank.
Okay.
So it's kind of a crapshoot.
Right. Okay, that makes some sense. Rob, so somebody gets elected tomorrow, what happens? Is there any formalized process? Is there anything you put them through or get them to do?
There's nothing really formalized, although we've been talking about a lot with that lately. We're starting to find that a lot of our officers that are looking to come, well, number one, it's harder and harder to find somebody that's looking to step up and actually take the position. And we're finding that they're a little bit different quality, we'll say, than they did years ago. Even though the amount, I guess we're a little odd, even though the amount of our structure fires are actually up, we seem that they might have a little less experience in the long run. We did actually recently develop some leadership training to put our officer hopefuls through, and we encourage everybody in the department to take it. Because you never know, in a couple of years somebody might have the interest to run as an officer. But nothing formal.
Okay.
And that might change.
Right. No, and again, everything we're talking about here, I don't want anyone to watching to think that somebody's doing it right or somebody's doing it wrong. These are opinions and really sharing information to try to see how we make it better. A question came out in the chat, so let's just do a little cross conversation. So Ethan and Adam, the question was directed, are you having any issues with retention of members, particularly on the volunteer side? Any issues there? Ethan or Adam, if you'd like to answer that.
Like our chief does the officers. We haven't had any problems with the officers. Volunteers seem to be doing all right. We do got some inactive volunteers, but I mean, I don't know, it seems to be going all right here though on officer side.
Okay. Okay. Ethan, is there any retention problems out there in Ohio where you are, in and around where you are? The city department, of course, is career, but are you seeing retention issues out there?
In general, officers were not. We struggle with staffing pretty much on a daily basis. I know yesterday we had one station closed and the tower was closed. So really it just depends on the day here for staffing in general.
Okay. All right. We have two questions, or a question and a comment from the audience. Officer list has remained stable for 25 years. The young moving in as older retires. The retires are still mentoring and teaching. That's huge, Tim. I love the word because it actually feeds into another question or comment here from the audience. So thank you for that, Tim. The question from John Dixon is, does anyone on the panel have a formal mentorship program in their department? And while you're waiting to answer that, Joe, was it you that said that in Oak Grove you actually paired folks up? Or was that you, Joe, at one time that you and I discussed this?
You talk about, yeah, that there are actually the groups are divided. There's 48 members in Oak Grove. That's maximum when when they have a full roster, and then those are divided into four groups. There's a captain and a lieutenant over that. This year we just began the officer team excellence program, and that's a facilitating process that I sit in on, and they actually talk about what their weak points are as an officer team and what their strong points are, and then they're focusing on policy and policy implementation this year. So they'll have 3 or 4 meetings this year where the concept is that what is true is what they all agree on, and they all manage together. And what is false is what each one of them, when they don't agree, and they manage in different directions. And so that's brought out a lot of the different components of the problems, and often a lot of conversation about what the weak points and what we need to learn or go fix.
All right, excellent. So anybody, Warren, did you have a formalized program for mentorship?
Nothing formal, although that had been talked about over the years. And I think with the size of the department, figured out how to implement it formally just became a back burner issue, unfortunately.
Right. And just remind the folks, what is your total career and what is the total number, career and volunteer personnel?
Last year, when I left in 2012, I think it was just over 550 career and probably 800 active volunteers.
Okay, so you're about 1,300, 1,400, 1,500 personnel, so that's a large organization to try to accomplish something. Greg, any thoughts on mentorship in your small organization? Any thoughts on preparing these folks for offices to do what they need to do?
Yeah, I mean, we do it mostly during drills, and then we have we don't man the stations. That we do. The chief is in doing admin during the weekdays, and then everyone else is on pager. But we do have a 24/7, 365 duty officer with a buggy, and he responds direct to things. So before people get put into that position, they absolutely mentor those people. And we mentor on the ground floor when people come in. People pick up. They're assigned a mentor in their station to work with, but it's a little less formal in the officer corps. I mean, we're myself and the chief, and then I have 38 paid on calls. So okay. It's not a big organization.
Okay, good. But I like the fact that you said that you're doing it on the way in the door. You're assigning them. So John Dixon will probably comment in a minute here if I can shake John out of the trees. John is very strong.
Sorry if I'm lagging here a little bit. Somebody mentioned earlier about starting a leadership program, and I think the leadership program at the ground floor is a great idea.
Yeah, I'm familiar with a lot of departments that actually wait for the promotion and then train the personnel, but I liked Warren's concept about getting it's twofold, right? If you wait for the people to pass the test, you know who you're training. You've got a known quantity, a known commodity there. So I think that's important. But I was mentioning about John Dixon, who's in the audience, about laying a foundation. John is very, very strong about laying a foundation, whether that's for the firefighter or the officer. So I think that's important. Let's go back to Tim, who's got another comment. He's seen a large increase of up-and-comers finding jobs in the fire service. So if you're running a volunteer organization, I think, Greg, you just alluded to that, many combination departments are hiring. Many work full-time and still volunteer. So you have maybe less volunteer time but more experience because they're taking that experience with the career department and bringing it over. So let's raise a little controversy, as I've been known to do once or twice. So what's the big deal? Can the chief pick his own staff? Is that a bad idea or a good idea? I mean, obviously it's fraught with, it's favoritism, it's this, it's that, or whatever. But if you're trying to move an organization forward, should there be some continuity in leadership? I used to joke all the time. We had a department. We ran 4 platoons, 4 shifts, and 3 stations. And I used to speak about the fact that I was running a 13-part organization. And everybody said, well, for God's sakes, Chief, it's 12. It's 4 groups and 3 stations. And I said, no, the 13th thing is what I believe is going on. And that may be completely different from any of the 4 times 3 that I saw. Is there a purpose, or is there a place, and this is fraught, it could be abused. I mean, there's no question there could be fraught with abuse. As I say this, I'm not blind to it. Just get the group's situation. What about if the chief picks his middle management? If you're in a corporation, corporation will promote who is the best person for their organization. I was teasing with Greg offline. Greg is got some pilot experience and flight experience. And I said, do you want somebody else choosing your co-pilot? Does that make sense for you? Well, he passed in a test, and you've never flown with him, but he's going to be your backup person. So what are your thoughts on having the fire department operate its management structure a little more toward the corporate side? And again, I understand the reasons of why we're not doing it. Greg, do you want to comment on that?
I don't think you can answer that without knowing if you're trying to make cultural change or maintain the status quo. I mean, if you're trying to make a shift in the organization, then I think it's a no-brainer that you need the person with the vision needs some authority to put people in the positions he needs to affect change.
Okay, I think that's fair. Can I don't know, who's the guy? He's got to be an important dude, because there's a guy on the panel with a suit and tie, with a shirt and tie, so he's got to have an opinion on this, right? I think we got to ask the guy. Joe, would you like to weigh in on this about, what is the importance of the team concept,
First of all, Chief Lamb, there's 2 reasons I wear a tie. One's a wedding, one's a funeral. Now, one of those occurred today.
Okay.
That's the reason it's on. The other piece, as far as you said, the importance of a team. Is that what you want me to go at this one?
Well, in other words, if we pick officers by a variety of methods, how important is it that the head of the department, and as to use Greg's words here, the person with the vision should build a cohesive team? Does our volunteer or career promotional systems allow that to occur?
I think the problems in the definition of the system inside the organization. I don't find one more at fault than the other. If one of the things I used to say a lot, an organization will not outperform the values of its leader. Individually they can, but as an organization they rarely outperform collectively the values of the leader. So if the leader's values and operating principles in their behaviors emulate that, then they will perform at that level for the most part, or that's the best level they'll perform at. So from the standpoint of what you want to accomplish, just like was said earlier, I think you got to choose. I think whoever has the authority and the authority having jurisdiction putting that mission together has to choose that. And I would argue that it's not the same forever. I would argue that it's dynamic. That an organization at this point in their cycle of growth and failure and growth and decay, let me say it another way, the organizational model needs to change with that to modify that. And I think that's what was meant by, are you trying to hold status quo, or are you trying to do the other? So my take on it is, if you give me the choice, I'm going to pick a more team-oriented environment where the leader has a strong strategic influence on how the organization is run, and the leader's smart enough to influence tactically from the strategic side what's going to happen tomorrow and how to keep them safe and keep them doing the mission and keep their behaviors going. So it's not the answer you're looking for, but I don't think there's one answer. I think one of the reasons there's so many jobs for consultants is because consultants pick one thing to go fix. There's not a member on this panel who can't be given a problem and go manage that problem to make that one better. But that doesn't happen is people who come in and make that one thing better without making a lot of things worse. And I think that's the problem we have overall, is that we don't need one answer. We don't need one model. We don't need, if I take the model that Chief Whitley used for Prince William and I try to run it with a 24-member department like I had at Sandy Ridge, I would have so much overhead to that model that I couldn't keep it staffed. If he tried to run that in Prince William the same way, he would fail miserably. So I don't think there's one answer. I think what we have to do is teach people the science of behavioral management, and then we have to best do that, and we have to do it legally and, more important, morally correct. And the challenge becomes is we're not trusted because we're liars. We freelance, and by the time we think, well, let's do it this way, and then somebody cuts a deal, somebody cuts a favor, and they do a relationship model instead of a process model, then all of a sudden there's no audit trail for that, and all of a sudden people are then divide up in groups, and now you're not dealing with the organization, you're dealing with packs of values. And that is really tough. One of the things we did at Sandy Ridge, for instance, we had a wisdom model. We had lead, manage, do, but we had a wisdom model. So what do you do with the wisdom, the collective wisdom in your organization? How do you influence the people who were there with the people who've been there a while? How do you keep the old codgers like me from keeping them from running forward and innovating and using new tools and matching the fire environment? It's all dynamic, and I think that's the key. And that's a lot longer answer than you wanted, but that's not. What do I normally do for you?
No,
by the way, the tie goes all the way down.
All right. I didn't know if that was a half a tie. Right. No, I appreciate that. I think it's good, and I think you hit on things. I think that some of our promotional systems hold over from a time where there was some serious mistrust, where there was some serious abuses, and there is a time. And my purpose for this was actually brought up by another one of the panel members. We get into this situation, and we are now all adapted to something that's existed, and the original reason it's here has long been bypassed. Maybe that old fire chief bent on nepotism or what have you. That's long gone. Yet we've inherited a promotional system that might be having an impact on the organization even today. We'll take one more comment from John, and then we will actually get some summary statements from the panel. So before I put John's comment up, I'm going to run the panel and ask what you think is the best way that we should be promoting folks. And it's not critical of your department. Some of our best practices. So give me a short best practice for how we can best promote people, either career or volunteer. And I did strike John out of the weeds there. I knew I would. So John talks an awful lot about indoctrination and inculcating ideas, attitudes, cognitive strategies, or a professional methodology. We must properly indoctrinate from day one to build the foundation the individual needs to build up, and there may be more to that. So I apologize. We lose some of these comments when they're long. But thank you, John. I knew you felt strongly about that, so I wanted to get to it. Adam, what is something you want to leave the audience with when we talk about selecting offices? What do you think we should be doing, or are you comfortable with what you're doing? So Adam, go ahead.
Way we've been doing it seems to be working out on our end. Are we doing it right? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that, but it's working in our department, and it'll probably continue on down the road in our department working that way. Should we change? I think so. I think we should be doing it a different way personally, but trying to get everybody else on board of it, it may not work for us.
Well, I think you said the magic words. Is it working for your department? And if it is, then it is a success. By its very nature, it is a success if it is working correctly. Can we tweak it? Sure, we can always tweak it, no doubt. Ethan, what are your thoughts? You're poking around the internet all the time. You're always around. What are your thoughts on selection of offices? We've heard a variety of different ways tonight. What are you thinking?
Well, Pete, I think you need to keep studying. You need to keep fresh, and don't become one of those people that just retires in place and no one notices. Keep studying and keep learning and be active.
All right, so and I think officers that are being promoted have to instill that value in folks that come behind them. So I think that's a good one. John, what are your thoughts? What's the takeaway here for officer promotional, officer selection? And
I believe that. Nope. Am I on?
Yes, you just got on. We missed the front end of that, so stop from the beginning.
Officer selection or promotion should come from the testing process, at least putting minimum time in as well as testing. But I also think you have to add in the interview process as well as the testing to see if the person is well-rounded enough to handle that position and score points off of that. That's one thing we do lack in my department is a interview. We solely base everything off of the civil service.
Okay, you cut out. You ended with the civil service, so everything's based off of civil service, no interview, and you're suggesting that there really needs to be another look and another piece. I think that makes some sense. Frank, your comments or your thoughts on officer selection? You seem to have a pretty progressive system in place. What are you thinking?
I think I like our process much better than it used to be because there was still that perception that it didn't matter what you received in your score, that if the chief wanted you to be the next person, that you may jump people. And when our new chief came 6 years ago, one of the things he kind of got out of his, he did a questionnaire before he arrived and asked the firefighters what they thought about different things. And one of the things was that same perception that the process was flawed. And so we developed this over time, and it always is continually changing. And part of that is from feedback after the process, from the people that were in the process. So that's, I guess, really what we're learning and trying to make the process better and better each time.
Well, and there's a lesson, there's a takeaway right there, and that is, if your process is not working to its optimum, change it, fix it, and it seems like you've moved in that direction. For the audience members that are with us, we are going to run just a tad over an hour, so stick with us for about 4 or 5 minutes. We're wrapping up now, so I'd ask you to just hang tight. Greg, what are your thoughts? Officer selection, promotion, are we doing it right? Can we do it better? What are your thoughts about what you've heard here tonight?
Yeah, it's been a real education. I mean, there's been every manner on the panel with different ways from, interview bias to more biased on just, like John was saying, just on the exam. So I'm a real big believer in promoting people with people skills and leadership skills into those positions because they're the frontline leaders of the fire department, and if they don't make authentic connections with people, it doesn't matter if they have the best message in the world, it won't get through to them. So I weight very heavily in that regard.
No, I think you're right. People skills. It is about people, right? It's the external people and the internal people if you're in that officer position. So well said, Greg. Well said. Joe, what are your thoughts here for his selection process, officer selection, promotional processes? What are your thoughts about what we've heard here tonight?
Oh, I think you're right on. This is always an interesting panel. I'll give you something that probably doesn't make a lot of sense, and that's usually what I do. If you take the word miscue and write it as a numerator in your equation, and in the denominator you put the EQ divided by the IQ, emotional quotient divided by the intellectual quotient divided by the social quotient, and what you end up with is a promotional process that you better consider the emotional capabilities, the intellectual capabilities, and the social and spiritual social capabilities of that person, that candidate, and you better do it aimed at what your miscues are in your organization.
Okay. All right. I like it. I like it. Rob, what are you thinking?
I think the way our election process works pretty well. I think a couple of improvements that can be done would be to maybe I would like to see some educational hours or courses separate an officer from a firefighter, as well as a chief from an officer from a firefighter. I think they need to hold themselves up to a more higher standard than just a firefighter. And on top of that, I think there should be some interview process, which we currently don't have. We've never even discussed, but that actually popped into my head from listening to the panel tonight. I think the interview process would help make sure that the candidate for office had the best values of the department in mind. You know, we see a lot of people holding office just for the sake of holding office. You know, they hold the position, but they don't necessarily do the job. And I think that the officers need to have the best value of the department in mind, as well as the vision of the leader in mind for the entire organization to move forward.
I like it. I like it. Warren, what do you got? What are you thinking?
Well, I think somebody's already touched on this. One size doesn't fit all, so you got to figure out what your department needs. And I think to do that, you got to take a holistic approach. You can't hinge it on one particular piece of an assessment center, or if you don't do those, an interview or whatever. You have to look at the whole package. And I'll go back to my earlier comment of making sure we need to start looking at, let's train them and prepare them before they even get to the promotion process so that they're ready, and stop doing the OJT afterward because we're looking for potential. Because I think we've all experienced that does not always work out for the department or even the individual who got promoted before they were trained and ready. So it's kind of unfair to both parties. The other thing I have just from my own experience, especially for the chiefs, is regardless of how you do your promotions, you have to make sure that somewhere on your senior staff you promote somebody who is going to be your conscience and tell you when you're not wearing any clothes. Because if you surround yourself with guys that are exactly like you, that's when you go down the boiling frog path of not knowing you're in trouble.
Yeah, well said. Well said. You want a second in command or your next person close to you to be able to say, hey, listen, you're leaving the reservation here. You better come back to the norm. And as a chief officer for many years, I think you're absolutely right on that. That is a very, very valuable resource. All right, we're going to summarize it. I am going to just depart from the norm here. Ethan, do you want to just give us a 1-minute snapshot on the project that you've just started? We're going to give Ethan the shameless plug tonight. He's going to wrap it up with the commercial. Ethan, what is this site you've just developed, and what's the point of it?
Pete, the site is passitonfiretraining.wordpress.com, and what I'm trying to do there's pass on accumulation of the daily fire news and training and articles in one place and pass that along to people.
All right, so say it again real slow, and is there an email if people want to get involved with you? So it is a little bit complicated because you got WordPress in the middle of it, so say it again so if folks want to jump on it.
Pass it on firetraining.wordpress.com, and on the website on the top left-hand side you can subscribe to an email list on there.
Okay, perfect, perfect. I want to give Ethan a little credit. He works hard at this, and nobody could curate more information off the internet in a day's time than him. So I look forward to that effort. All right, we will see you all here next week at Firefighting Today. You can check our archives at firefightingtoday.com. I appreciate everybody's input, and we will see you next week.